The gunshot echoed through Dust Point's main street as Coltrane Maverick's horse collapsed beneath him, blood pooling in the dirt. Through the haze of dust and gunpowder, he watched in horror as Evangeline Morrow stepped into a gilded carriage, her wedding dress trailing behind her like fallen snow. The Iron Baron Cornelius Grimwald's cruel laughter cut through the air as he claimed his prize. The woman Coltrane had ridden 3 days straight to reach. "You're too late, Cowpoke," Grimwald sneered from the carriage window, his scarred face twisted in triumph. "The debt's been paid in full." Coltrane struggled to his feet, ignoring the burning pain in his shoulder where Grimwald's bullet had grazed him. His weathered hands trembled as he watched the carriage wheels begin to turn. Evangeline's face appeared briefly at the window, her emerald eyes meeting his across the dusty street. In that fleeting moment, he saw everything the love she still carried, the desperation, the silent plea for rescue. The carriage lurched forward, bound for Grimwald's fortress-like estate in the Northern Territories. Coltrane's jaw clenched as he realized the magnitude of his failure. He'd promised Evangeline's dying father he'd return from the cattle, drive with enough money to pay off the family's crushing debt. Instead, he'd arrived to find the old man already buried and his daughter sold like livestock to settle what was. Doc Henley rushed from his office, medical bag in hand, but Coltrane waved him away. "Just a scratch, Doc. Tell me about the girl. Happened 3 days ago," the elderly physician said grimly. Grimwald came with papers showing the Morrow family owed him near $4,000. When Evangeline couldn't pay, he invoked the old territorial loshi became his property to settle the debt. Coltrane's blood ran cold. The territorial marriage law was a relic from desperate times, when women were so scarce that debt bondage was legally recognized. Most decent folk considered it barbaric, but Grimwald operated outside the bounds of decency. "There's more," Doc Henley continued. "He's planning to take her north to his mining compound. Word is he's got himself a preacher up there who'll perform. Any ceremony for the right price, no questions asked." The cowboy's mind raced as he surveyed his options. His horse was dying. His money pouch contained barely $30. And Grimwald had a 3-day head start with armed escort. But Coltrane Maverick hadn't survived Apache raids and stampeding cattle to be deterred by impossible odds. "I need to borrow your mare," he said, his voice carrying the steel determination that had seen him through countless dangers. "And I'll need you to send word to my brother Jasper down in Santa Fe. Tell him to bring whatever men he can spare." As Doc Henley nodded and hurried away, Coltrane stared down the empty road where dust still hung in the air from Grimwald's departure. Evangeline had looked at him with such desperate hope, even as she was being carried away to a fate worse than death. He'd failed her once by arriving too late, but he'd be damned if he'd fail her again. The sun was setting behind the rolling hills, painting the sky the color of blood and gold. Somewhere in that vast wilderness, the woman he loved was being taken further from him with each passing moment. But Coltrane Maverick had never backed down from a fight, and he wouldn't start now. The mining compound loomed against the starless sky like a cancerous growth, its smokestacks belching black poison into the mountain air. Coltrane crouched behind a boulder, studying the fortress through his father's old spyglass. 2 weeks of hard riding had brought him here, following a trail of burned homesteads and terrorized settlers who'd all whispered the same thing Grimwald was preparing for. War. The compound was a maze of wooden towers, barbed wire, and armed sentries. At its heart stood Grimwald's mansion, a grotesque monument to stolen wealth built from the bones of dead miners and the dreams of ruined families. Somewhere behind those walls, Evangeline was trapped. "Jesus, Colt," whispered his brother Jasper, sliding up beside him in the darkness. "This ain't a rescue mission. It's suicide." Jasper had arrived that morning with 5 hard men from Santa Fe, gunslingers who owed Coltrane favors from the old days. But even with their help, they were vastly outnumbered. Grimwald's private army consisted of nearly 40 mercenaries, criminals, and deserters who'd kill for the price of a bottle of whiskey. "Maybe so," Coltrane replied, never taking his eyes off the compound. "But I gave her father my word, and I gave her my heart. That's worth dying for." Through the spyglass, he caught a glimpse of movement in the mansion's upper window. A figure in white stood silhouetted against the lamplight. Evangeline, still in her wedding dress. The sight of her sent rage coursing through his veins like liquid fire. There's got to be another way, muttered Diego Herrera, one of Jasper's men. Grimwald's got connections all the way to the territorial capital. Even if we get the girl out, where do we run? Coltrane lowered the spyglass and turned to face his small band of allies. These men had ridden with him through hell before, but he could see doubt creeping into their eyes. They were brave, but they weren't fools. I've been thinking about that, Coltrane said slowly. Grimwald's operation here is built on fear and isolation. But what if we could turn his own methods against him? He pulled out a hand-drawn map of the compound, marking key locations with charcoal. Diego, you and Whitmore create a distraction at the eastern gate. Make them think we're launching a full assault. Jasper, you and the others hit the armory from the south. I need 15 minutes of chaos, and you, Jasper asked, though he already knew the answer. I'm going through the front door, Coltrane replied grimly. Grimwald's got Evangeline in the main house, probably planning some mockery of a wedding. Ceremony? I'll challenge him directly. Territorial law still recognizes the right of combat for contested marriages. The men exchanged glances. It was a desperate plan, built on legal technicalities and pure audacity. But they'd followed Coltrane Maverick into worse situations and lived to tell about it. As they prepared to move into position, Coltrane felt the weight of his father's Colt, .45, against his hip. The old man had carried it through the war and passed it down with the words, "Son, there are times when doing right means risking everything. This here iron will never let you down if your cause is just." The wind carried the sound of rough laughter from the compound, and Coltrane's jaw tightened.
Oh.
Somewhere in that nest of vipers, Evangeline was counting the hours until dawn, when Grimwald planned to make her his wife in the eyes of his corrupted law, not if Coltrane Maverick had. Anything to say about it? The explosion at the eastern gate lit up the night sky like the devil's own fireworks. Coltrane spurred his borrowed horse forward through the chaos. Ha! Riding hard toward the main house as gunfire erupted from every direction. Grimwald's mercenaries scrambled like disturbed ants, rushing toward the diversions his brothers-in-arms had created. He leaped from his horse at the mansion's front porch, his boots hitting the wooden planks with authority that echoed through the night. The ornate doors, carved with grotesque gargoyles, stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, he could hear the sound of terrified sobbing and a man's cruel laughter. Grimwald. Coltrane's voice boomed through the mansion as he kicked the doors wide open. I've come to collect what's mine. The opulent foyer reeked of expensive cigars and cheap perfume. A grand staircase curved upward, its banister carved from ivory stained with blood. At the top of the stairs stood Cornelius Grimwald himself, his massive frame draped in a burgundy smoking jacket. Beside him, trembling in her torn wedding dress, was Evangeline. Well, Grimwald chuckled, his scarred face twisted in amusement. The lovesick cowboy has come calling.
Oh.
You're just in time to witness the consummation of my marriage. Eyes met Coltrane's across the distance, and he saw the spark of hope that hadn't died despite her ordeal. Her beautiful face bore the marks of rough treatment, but her spirit remained unbroken. She's not your wife, Coltrane declared, his hand resting on his gun. I invoke the right of combat under territorial marriage law. You claim her through debt, but I claim her through love and the right to defend what's mine. Grimwald's laughter filled the mansion like poison gas. Combat? You pathetic fool. Have 40 men surrounding this house? What makes you think you'll live long enough to draw that rusty iron? 'Cause your men are busy fighting for their lives, Coltrane replied calmly. And because the law is the law, even in this god-forsaken place, refuse my challenge, and every man in the territory will know you're a coward who hides behind purchased muscle. 8. The Iron Baron's face darkened with rage. His reputation was built on fear and dominance, and being called a coward in front of his prize would undermine everything he'd worked to build. Fine, Grimwald snarled, pushing Evangeline roughly aside. But when I kill you, boy, I'm going to make her watch. Then I'm going to make her thank me for putting you out of your misery. He drew an ornate pistol from his jacket, its silver barrel gleaming in the lamplight. Coltrane's own weapon remained holstered, but his stance shifted subtly, coiling like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. Evangeline Coltrane called without taking his eyes off Grimwald. "Remember what I told you that night by the river? About always having faith in tomorrow?" Her voice came through her tears, barely a whisper, that love always finds a way. Wald raised his pistol with deliberate slowness, savoring the moment. "Any last words, Cowboy?" Coltrane's lips curved in a cold smile. "Duck." The sound of splintering wood erupted from behind Grimwald as Jasper burst through the second-story window, swinging on a rope with both guns blazing. The Iron Baron spun toward this new threat, his shot going wild as Coltrane's Colt cleared. Leather with practiced precision. 2 gunshots rang out simultaneously. Grimwald's ornate pistol flew from his hand as Coltrane's bullet shattered his wrist. The Iron Baron's scream of rage and pain echoed through the mansion as he crashed to his knees. "It's over, Grimwald," Coltrane declared, his smoking gun trained. "On the fallen tyrant? Release Evangeline from the debt contract, or I'll let the territorial marshal sort out your illegal mining. Operation and your collection of wanted men." Blood streaming down his arm, Grimwald glared up at his conqueror with pure hatred. But he was a survivor above all else, and he knew when he was beaten. Dawn broke over the mining compound like a benediction, its golden light streaming through the shattered windows of Grimwald's mansion. Coltrane sat at the Iron Baron's ornate desk, methodically destroying every debt contract and bill of sale he could find. The legal documents that had bound so many innocent people to Grimwald's will crackled and burned in the fireplace, their smoke carrying away years of suffering. Evangeline stood by the window, finally free of the wedding dress that had been her prison. Jasper had found her own clothes in Grimwald's trophy room, a sick collection of personal items stolen from his victims. She wore a simple blue dress now, the same one she'd worn the night Coltrane had left for the cattle drive, where they'd walked by the river and planned their future together. "The territorial marshal's men should be here by noon," Jasper reported, entering the study with a satisfied grin. "Turns out Grimwald's been wanted for murder in 3 territories. There's a substantial bounty on his head." Grimwald himself sat bound in the corner, his wounded wrist bandaged, but his spirit thoroughly broken. The sight of his empire crumbling around him had reduced the once feared Iron Baron to a whimpering shell of his former self. "What about his men?" Coltrane asked, not looking up from the documents he was burning. "Most scattered like leaves in a windstorm. Once word spread that their boss was finished," Diego reported from the doorway. "The few that stayed are more interested in settling old scores against Grimwald than fighting us. Turns out he wasn't popular even among his own hired guns." Coltrane finally looked up at Evangeline, who had remained silent through the night. Her green eyes held depths of pain he couldn't fully fathom, and he wondered if their love could survive what she'd endured. "Evie," he said softly, using the pet name he'd whispered to her in gentler times, "we need to talk." She turned from the window, and he saw the strength that had always drawn him to her, the same iron will that had helped her survive her father's illness and the family's mounting debts. But there was something else there now, a hardness born of suffering. "You came for me," she said simply, "even when it seemed impossible." "Gave you my word," Coltrane replied, rising from the desk. "And I gave you my heart. Nothing Grimwald could do would change that." She crossed the room slowly, her fingers reaching out to touch the bullet graze on his shoulder that had never properly healed. "I thought about you every day, even when he tried to break my spirit. Even when I thought I'd never see you again, I held on to the memory of us." "And now?" Coltrane asked, afraid of the answer. Evangeline's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "I know that love really does find a way." Their kiss was tender at first, then desperate, as if they were trying to erase the weeks of separation and terror through touch alone. When they finally broke apart, Coltrane saw that the hardness in her eyes had softened, replaced by the warmth. He remembered. "There's something else," Jasper said, clearing his throat awkwardly. "Grimwald's safe contained more than just debt contracts. Seems our Iron Baron was hoarding gold coins, Spanish pieces, Mexican pesos, even some old Confederate currency that might still be worth something back east." Coltrane looked at the small fortune spread across the desk. It was more money than he'd ever seen in one place, enough to buy a ranch, start a family, build the life he and Evangeline had dreamed about. "Blood money," he said grimly. Stolen. From people he ruined. Maybe, Evangeline said, picking up one of the gold coins and turning it over in her palm. But we could use it to help those people. Buy back their homes, pay off their debts, give them a chance to start over. The idea resonated with something deep in Coltrane's soul. Justice wasn't just about punishing the wicked, it was about healing the wounds they'd caused. There's enough here to help every family in 3 counties, he mused. And still have. Plenty left for ourselves. From the corner, Grimwald let out a bitter laugh. Noble fools. That money won't buy you happiness. It'll just make you targets for the next man who decides to take what's yours. Coltrane walked over to the bound prisoner and crouched down to meet his eyes. The difference between you and me, Grimwald, is that I know the only things worth having are the ones you earn honest and the ones you're willing to fight for. 3 months later, the town of Dust Point had transformed from a dying frontier settlement into a thriving community. The money recovered from Grimwald's operation had indeed helped dozens of families reclaim their homes and restart their lives. But more importantly, word of Coltrane's victory had spread throughout the territory, inspiring others to stand up against the corruption that had plagued the region for years. Coltrane stood on the porch of the newly built ranch house, watching Evangeline tend to the garden she'd planted behind the barn. The sight of her in simple work clothes, her dark hair catching the afternoon sun, still took his breath away. They'd been married by the circuit preacher just 2 weeks after Grimwald's arrest. With half the territory in attendance to celebrate, the union that had begun as a rescue and blossomed into legend, Ryder, coming in from the east, called Vicente Morales, one of the ranch hands Coltrane had hired from among Grimwald's former victims. The young man had lost his family's farm to the Iron Baron's schemes, but had proven himself a skilled horseman. And loyal friend Coltrane shaded his eyes against the sun and recognized the approaching figure Marshal Theodore Blackstone, the territorial lawman who'd taken Grimwald into custody. The marshal's grim expression suggested this wasn't a social call. "Afternoon, Marshal," Coltrane greeted as the older man dismounted. "You look like a man with troubles on his mind." Blackstone removed his hat and wiped the sweat from his forehead. "I'm afraid I am, Colt. Got word from the territorial capital yesterday. Grimwald's escaped." The words hit Coltrane like a physical blow. Evangeline, who'd been walking up from the garden, stopped dead in her tracks. Color drained from her face, and Coltrane saw the fear she'd been fighting to overcome come flooding back. "How?" Coltrane asked, his voice deadly calm. "Prison transport was ambushed 20 miles outside Santa Fe," Blackstone explained. "Professional job, someone with resources and connections. We found 3 guards dead and the wagon burned. Grimwald and 2 other prisoners just vanished." Evangeline sank into one of the porch chairs, her hands trembling. "He swore he'd come back for me," she whispered. "The night before you came, he told me that if anyone ever tried to take me away from him, he'd hunt us to the ends of the earth." Coltrane's jaw tightened as he absorbed this information. He'd known men like Grimwald before, creatures driven by ego and revenge who couldn't let go of perceived slights. The Iron Baron wouldn't just disappear into obscurity. He'd want his property back and his honor restored. "What about his old gang?" Coltrane asked. "The ones who scattered when we took the compound?" "That's what worries me most," Blackstone admitted. "Reports are coming in from across the territory about organized raids, systematic attacks on settlements. Someone's rebuilding Grimwald's operation, and they're being smart about it, hitting isolated targets, avoiding direct confrontation with law enforcement." Vicente had been listening from the barn, and now he approached with obvious concern. "Senator Coltrane, my cousin in Millerville, sent word last week about strangers asking questions about you and Senora Evangeline. Men with money, paying for information." The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place in Coltrane's mind. Grimwald wasn't just free, he was actively hunting them, gathering intelligence and resources for what would undoubtedly be a carefully planned assault. "Marshal, I appreciate you riding out to warn us," Coltrane said, his mind already shifting into the tactical mode that had kept him alive through countless dangers. "But Evie and I aren't running. This is our home now, and these people depend on us." "Colt, be reasonable," Blackstone pleaded. "Grimwald's got nothing left to lose now." He'll come at you with everything he's got, and innocent folks will get caught in the crossfire. Evangeline stood up slowly, her initial fear hardening into determination. The marshal's right about one thing: innocent people will suffer if we stay. But he's wrong about running being the answer. She moved to stand beside her husband, her hand finding his with practiced ease. We've helped rebuild this community, and now it's strong enough to help defend itself. If Grimwald wants a war, then we'll give him one. But this time, we'll be ready for him. Coltrane felt a surge of pride as he looked at his wife. The frightened girl who'd been sold to pay her family's debts had become a woman of steel, tempered by adversity into something unbreakable. Send word to Jasper and the others, Coltrane told the marshal. Tell them Grimwald's coming, and we're going to finish what we started. The attack came on a moonless night when the shadows lay thick across the valley. Coltrane had been expecting it for 2 weeks. Ever since reports confirmed that Grimwald had recruited a small army of desperados and displaced mercenaries, what he hadn't expected was the Iron Baron's tactical brilliance instead of a direct assault on the ranch. Grimwald struck at the heart of the community itself. Dust Point's church bell tolled frantically in the darkness, its bronze voice carrying across the prairie like a scream for help. From the ranch house porch, Coltrane could see the orange glow of fires burning in the town center. Grimwald was forcing his hand, using innocent civilians as bait to draw him into a trap. It's what I would do, Coltrane admitted grimly too. Jasper, who'd arrived 3 days earlier with a dozen seasoned fighters. He knows I won't let the townspeople suffer for our fight. Evangeline emerged from the house carrying Coltrane's rifle and ammunition belt. Her face was pale but determined, and he could see the same resolve that had carried her through her captivity burning in her green eyes. The women and children are secured in the root cellar, she reported. Maria and old Mrs. Henderson are armed and ready if anyone gets past us. You should be with them, Coltrane said, though he knew it was useless. They'd had this argument several times over the past weeks. My place is beside my husband, Evangeline replied firmly. I've already been Grimwald's victim once. I won't hide while he terrorizes our friends. The sound of approaching hoofbeats cut through the night air. Vicente and 2 other scouts returning from their reconnaissance of the town. Their horses were lathered with sweat, and Vicente's face bore the grim expression of a man who'd seen hell up close. It's bad, Senator, he reported breathlessly. Grimwald's got maybe 30 men spread throughout the town. They've taken hostages. In the saloon and the general store? That's not the worst of it. What else? Coltrane asked, though he dreaded the answer. He's got dynamite. Lots of it. Threatens to blow up the schoolhouse with everyone inside if you don't surrender yourself and send your Evangeline by dawn. The words hit Coltrane like a physical blow. The schoolhouse served as the town's community center, and on any given night, it might hold 20 or more people attending various meetings and social gatherings. Grimwald had chosen his leverage carefully. How long until dawn? Jasper asked, checking his pocket watch. For hours, maybe less, Vicente replied. Coltrane closed his eyes and tried to think. Every instinct told him this was exactly what Grimwald wanted: to force a desperate rescue attempt that would end with his enemies dead and his reputation restored, but he couldn't abandon the innocent people who'd trusted him to protect them. There's another way, Evangeline said quietly. Turned to her as she stared toward the burning town with an expression of cold calculation. Grimwald wants me alive, right? I'm his symbol of ownership, his proof that he can take whatever he wants. Evie, no, Coltrane said immediately, recognizing the direction of her thoughts. Listen to me, she continued urgently. If I surrender myself to him, he'll release the hostages. You know he will. His ego demands a public victory, not a massacre. And once I'm close to him, once his guard is down. She let the implication hang in the air. It was a desperate plan, built on assumptions about Grimwald's psychology and requiring split-second timing to execute. But it was also their best chance. To save innocent lives, it's suicide, Jasper said bluntly. Even if you get close enough to strike, his men will gun you down before you can escape. Not if we create the right distraction, Coltrane said slowly, his tactical mind beginning to see the possibilities. Vicente, how many of Grimwald's men are actually watching the schoolhouse? Maybe 6 or 7. The rest are spread out through the town, waiting for you to come riding in. Coltrane nodded grimly. Could work, but the timing would have to be perfect. And the cost of failure would be measured in innocent blood. All right, he said finally. Here's what we're going to do. The false dawn was painting the eastern sky a pale gray when Evangeline walked slowly down Dust Point's main street, her hands raised in surrender. She wore the same blue dress she'd been married in, and her dark hair flowed loose around her shoulders like a banner of defiance. Behind her, at a distance of 50 yards, Coltrane followed with his hands bound behind his back and Jasper's gun at his spine, a carefully orchestrated charade designed to sell their capitulation. Cornelius. Grimwald stood in the doorway of the schoolhouse, his wounded arm in a sling, but his smile triumphant. The weeks since his escape had not been kind to him. His face was gaunt, his clothes shabby, and his eyes held the fevered gleam of a man consumed by obsession. But his voice still carried the authority of someone accustomed to absolute power. "Dear wife," he called mockingly as Evangeline approached, "how good of you to return to your proper place." "Release the hostages," Evangeline replied, her voice steady despite the terror she must have been feeling. "You have what you wanted." Grimwald's laughter echoed off the wooden buildings like the cry of a carrion bird. "Oh, but I don't have what I want. Not yet. You see, our cowboy hero here needs to understand the consequences of his interference. The good people of Dust Point need to learn what happens to communities that shelter my enemies." From his position, behind Evangeline, Coltrane could see the deployment of Grimwald's forces. As Vicente had reported, most of the Iron Baron's men were scattered throughout the town, positioned to catch any rescue attempt in a devastating crossfire. But their attention was focused outward, watching for an attack that would never come from the direction they expected. "You have your revenge," Coltrane called out, playing his part in the deception. "Let these people go. Your fight is with me. My fight is with anyone who dares to oppose me," Grimwald snarled. "But you're right about one thing, it ends here. Today, with you watching your precious wife die before I put a bullet in your brain." The Iron Baron raised a pistol and pointed it directly at Evangeline's heart. In that moment, time seemed to slow to a crawl. Coltrane could see the finger tightening on the trigger, could see the tears streaming down his wife's face, could hear the thunderous beating of his own heart. Then the church bell began to toll not. The frantic alarm of the night before, but the steady, measured rhythm of a funeral dirge. It was the signal they'd been waiting for. Evangeline suddenly dropped to the ground as the first of Jasper's men opened fire from the church bell tower. Grimwald's shot went wide, shattering a window behind where she'd been standing. At the same moment, Vicente and his volunteers emerged from their hiding places in the surrounding buildings, catching Grimwald's scattered forces in a perfectly coordinated ambush. Coltrane's bonds fell away. They'd been nothing but loose rope, designed to fool observers, and his hand found the concealed derringer. Evangeline had slipped him during their final embrace. The small gun cracked like a whip, and Grimwald stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. But the Iron Baron was far from finished. With his remaining good arm, he grabbed a stick of dynamite from the crate beside the schoolhouse door, his thumb already working to light the fuse. "If I can't have you, then no one can," he screamed, his voice cracking with madness. "I'll bring this whole damn town down around us." Evangeline rolled aside as Coltrane charged forward, knowing he had perhaps 3 seconds before the dynamite exploded. Grimwald raised the sputtering stick above his head, his face twisted in a rictus of insane triumph. The shot came from an unexpected direction, not from Coltrane's derringer, but from the schoolhouse window where one of the hostages had managed to get hold of a dropped rifle. The bullet took Grimwald in the chest, spinning him around and sending the lit dynamite flying harmlessly into the street, where it exploded in a shower of dirt and splinters. As the smoke cleared, Coltrane found himself standing over his fallen enemy, Cornelius Grimwald. The Iron Baron, who had terrorized the territory for years, lay dying in the dust of the street he'd tried to destroy. His eyes found Coltrane's one last time, filled with hatred even as life faded from them. "This ith over," he whispered. "Yes, it is," Coltrane replied quietly. "It's finally over." The battle for Dust Point lasted only minutes more, caught between the townspeople's coordinated resistance and Jasper's fighters, Grimwald's mercenaries, either surrendered or fled into the prairie. By the time the sun fully rose, the town was free, and the reign of terror that had gripped the territory for so long had finally ended. Coltrane helped Evangeline to her feet. They stood together. In the middle of the street, where their nightmare had begun months before, around them, the people of Dust Point emerged from their hiding places, their faces reflecting a mixture of relief, gratitude, and the quiet pride of those who had stood up for themselves and won. "Is it really over?" Evangeline asked, leaning against her husband's chest. Coltrane looked around at the faces of their friends and neighbors, at the town they'd helped to build and defend, at the vast prairie stretching away toward a horizon bright with promise. "Yes," he said, his voice carrying the certainty of a man who had finally found his home. "It's over, and we're free." 6 months later, as Evangeline rocked their newborn son on the porch of their ranch house, she would often think back to that moment of triumph. The child had Coltrane's strong jaw and her green eyes, and in his tiny features, she could see the future they'd fought so hard to protect. Coltrane had kept his promise after all love had found a way.
All love.
Even when all seemed lost. And in the growing prosperity of Dust Point, in the laughter of children playing safely in the streets, in the sound of church bells ringing in celebration rather than alarm, their victory lived on. The cowboy had been too late once, but he had stayed behind to win her back, and in doing so, he had won something far greater: a home, a family, and a community where love and justice could flourish under the endless western sky.